USC continues to build a really, really good staff in Los Angeles. Is it enough for them to be able to start turning the corner with the 2025 season? The 2024 Oregon Ducks may go down as one of the best teams to come out of Eugene, maybe of all time, but could the 2025 squad take it to another level and be better? It's time for some West Coast ball talk.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
These are two programs with two very different conversations right now and two very different feels in Los Angeles and Eugene, respectively. You take a look at the Oregon Ducks. This is a program that's trying to figure out, how do we jump up? How do we stay within the elite of college football? How do we win or are in the conversation for Big Ten championships every year, making college football playoffs every year? How do we take it to that next level and win the first national championship in program history? The discussion surrounding the folks that fight on in Southern California, that's a little bit different considering what the last two seasons have looked like. The conversation surrounding them is, how do we continue to get better players in Southern California? How do we continue to make improvements so we can get to an 8-win level, a 9-win level, and we can create that bridge maybe in a few years where we can maybe make a run towards a college football playoff or a Big Ten championship? These are two programs on two different levels. I mentioned the last 2 years. Oregon has gone 25-3 during that period. Of course, that includes last year's Big Ten championship. USC had a great first year, of course, with Lincoln Riley. Going to the Pac-12 championship, of course, losing to the Utah Utes that year, but they were one game away, Heisman Trophy that year with Caleb Williams. They were one game away from making a 4-team college football playoff. Ever since then, they've gone 15-11 with 2 bowl wins, certainly, though. But the Holiday Bowl, the Las Vegas Bowl, USC wants to certainly take more steps forward beyond playing for in those specific type of bowl games. Let's start first with those Trojans from USC. Well, I'm not drinking the Cardinal and Gold Kool-Aid maybe right now as I was in September. That didn't exactly work out the best for me, didn't it? This is a program that has a long way to go, and turning the corner for USC looks a lot different than maybe turning the corner for Oregon and some of these other programs as well. It's turning the corner to be able to consistently build winning teams and winning seasons at USC, and that might look a little bit different than it does for some of these other programs in the Big Ten Conference right now. But I will say this, considering how this offseason started, with all of those transfer portal departures, there is a little bit more positivity surrounding this USC football program now, and it starts at the top. Right now, in this current day and age of college football, it is becoming more and more like the National Football League. And a lot of times in college football, you need a great director of player personnel, a chief of staff, a general manager, whatever you want to call it. In USC this offseason, they went out and they got one of the best in the game, taking one from their rival in Notre Dame, taking Chad Bowden. I think that's where I really want to start with this, as far as talking about if USC is going to turn the corner. For them to turn the corner, they need to continue just bring in better players. Okay, when we talk about the conversation of where USC is compared to maybe where some college football playoff teams are or some conference championship teams are, I think it just comes down to talent. It comes down to players in the room. And I think what Chad Bowden proved that he can do at Notre Dame is that he can go out, he can recruit good players, and he can give this coaching staff good players to be able to develop into winning or maybe championship level football teams. He was Notre Dame's first general manager, the 2024 Football Scoop Player Personnel Director of the Year. That's kind of my first point. as far as player personnel and Chad Bowden as it goes with them possibly turning the corner. My second point, and we're talking optimism right now for USC. My second point, want to make sure I get that in the shot right there because I was holding it up out of frame. My second point as it pertains to the Trojans right now is what they're doing in this 2026 recruiting class. It's maybe starting to get back on track with what we're used to for USC. According to On3, they have the number 2 class for 2026 behind only the Oregon Ducks, who sit up there at number 1. They have 4 top 150 commits. And folks, that number will continue to grow as Chad Bowden lays down his plan, as Chad Bowden really gets his feet on the ground in Southern California. This thing is going to continue to get better. Okay, he is one of the best out there as far as acquiring talent. And him and Lincoln Riley together, Lincoln Riley, like out of all of these things that I could say about USC turning the corner, Lincoln Riley is not at the tip of my tongue. And that should maybe say something a little bit right there. But I think having Chad Bowden running this recruiting plan and formulating this recruiting plan with Lincoln Riley, I think is going to allow USC to continue to get better and better and better over time as it pertains to bringing in better players and getting USC to where they expect to be from a recruiting standpoint, and that's in the top 10 every single season. As far as 2025 goes, I really like their defense. And I think their defense is going to continue to turn the corner, and I think their defense is going to continue to improve. Now, I generally think when you bring in a new staff on either side of the football, I think the biggest jump will be from year 1 to year 2. That's when the system is installed. A lot of the newness is now a little bit more familiar. And now you can take what you know, and now you can improve on your skills as you move on to year number 2. When you go from like year 0 to year 1, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of implementation, working out the kinks, what works and what doesn't with the scheme versus the personnel. So I think this season could be a bigger jump, a more sizable jump for USC, and you could really start to see their defense, I think, be really, really good within the Big Ten Conference. Last season, for example, you talk about this jump. Here's the type of jump that we saw in year number 1 for this USC defensive coaching staff. In 2023, the Trojans were 97th in the country in DF+. They jump up to 37th in DF+. Hey, if you're not much of an analytics, how about some good old-fashioned math? In 2023, they were 121st in scoring defense, giving up 34.4 points per game. Hard stop before I get to the 2024 numbers. In 2023, it was a combination of a couple of things. That was one of the best, maybe the best Pac-12 season we've seen in a long time. And USC's defense took on some of the best offenses that we've seen in a long time. But on the flip side, this was still a bad coaching staff. So I think those combination of things, of course, led to the bad triple-digit type of season in 2023. Like you had Bo Nix's Oregon, you had Michael Penix in Washington, you played a Jedfish Arizona team that went 10-3, Colorado, Notre Dame. Like they were all in that slate in 2023 over there. But this was also a defense that gave up 49 points to Cal and 38 to UCLA in a loss. And I think when you look forward to 2024, look, I don't say this as a slight to the Big Ten, but that was like a record-setting year for the Pac-12. And I think USC's defense was going to improve just because they weren't facing 4,000-yard passers throughout their conference slate. But when it comes to scoring defense, they went from 34.4 points per game, 121st in the country, as I already mentioned, to 58th in the country, chopping 10 points off of that thing, going to 24.1 points per game this season. So you saw a level of improvement in year 1. Now it's time to really kick into gear in year 2. And I think a big part of their defense kicking into gear in year number 2 is going to be their defensive line. Out of all of the 3 levels of the defense for USC, I think I'm most excited about what this defensive line can do. Anthony Lucas comes back. He was very good before he got injured last year. Devin Tompkins, Braylon Shelby, Kobe Pepe, Cam Fountain are all coming back this season. I'm really excited to see the development that Cam Fountain especially can have coming off the edge in his sophomore season this year. A potential Lucas and Fountain combination is very exciting for the Trojans. But then you bring in some of that beef that I've talked about in previous versions of this show with 300-plus pound bodies coming over from the SEC transfers, Keyshawn Silver and Jamal Jarrett. And then, of course, you got Thanos, Jakeem Stewart, the all-everything five-star defensive lineman, true freshman. I think there's a lot of depth. I think there's a lot to be excited about, certainly. Eric Henderson, I really like him and his ability to be able to continue to develop on this defensive line as well. Now, when I look at this whole, I mentioned staff at the beginning of this thing. When I look at the USC staff specifically on defense, it's very clear to me the image that they're trying to build. They are loading their defensive staff with former NFL coaches, right? You look at Eric Henderson, the guy I just mentioned, former defensive line coach. He came over from the Los Angeles Rams. What a press conference it was for Rob Ryan introducing himself. Of course, he's got so much NFL experience. He's coming in to be the linebackers coach for USC. Danton Lynn, the leader of this whole thing, in there, a defensive coordinator. Of course, he had a lot of NFL experience with the Baltimore Ravens defense, and we know how successful that Ravens-style defense has been over with the Michigan Wolverines. I think USC is building a defensive staff, and it's building a message to transfer portal players as well as high school recruits. We've got a defensive coaching staff full of former NFL coaches that know what it takes to succeed in the NFL, that knows what it takes for you to be able to get to the National Football League. And I think, like, what does it say about USC as a program where that is head coached by Lincoln Riley, supposedly this offensive mastermind, and here I am raving and salivating and very excited over what USC is doing on the defensive side of the ball. That should signal some excitement for some Trojan fans down there in Southern California as well. The thing I want to finish up about turning the corner in 2025 for USC is I think we know who we really want to get the football to. At the beginning of last season for the USC Trojans, and I remember talking about this in my season preview with Ryan Dyrud. I remember really talking about it throughout the season, even as well as who's going to stand out as the number one guy? Who's going to be the receivers? And it was different. It seemed very different for USC from week to week to week to week. Now you have the departures of Zachariah Branch. You have the departures of Kyron Hudson. You have the departures of Deuce Robinson. Now I think you are able to focus on what could be one of the best wide receiver duos, not only in the Big Ten, but I'm going to say it right now, maybe all of college football, in Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon. It was very clear to me that as the season went along and at different parts during the season, that these are the two guys that really stood out. These are the two guys that I think USC really needed to focus in on their passing game. And as we look forward to 2025 and their ability to maybe turn the corner sooner rather than later, having these type of game-changing wide receivers, I think is exactly what Lincoln Riley wants within this offense for the USC Trojans. Now, they got to figure something out at quarterback. I've said it before. I don't think Jaden Mayava is that guy. I like Husan Longstreet, their true freshman quarterback. Will he start week one? I'm not sure. It wouldn't necessarily be shocking to me if Husan Longstreet started week one. The start of the season is a little bit softer for USC, so being able to work him in and develop that chemistry and those relationships with those wide receivers and build a lot of that confidence early could be exactly what Husan Longstreet needs. And when you have a true freshman quarterback, potentially, having two weapons out there like Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon is only going to help the young man become a better quarterback as time certainly goes on. There is a long way to go, I think, for USC to get to that level that Trojan fans want them to get to, But there are now signs of positivity surrounding this program, and you can maybe start to see some factors where they're maybe starting to turn the corner starting here in 2025. Let's go up the West Coast. Let's go up the beautiful 101 up to the state of Oregon, the defending Big Ten champions. And let's talk about them a little bit. You know, there was a lot of talk last season. Well, you know, I talked to Oregon people before the season. I talked to Oregon people in the middle of the season. I talked to Oregon people at the end of the season. And a lot of times at every single part of the season, said, yeah, this Oregon team, it's up there as one of the best of all time. 2010, 2012, 2014, 2024 is certainly in that discussion. And winning the Big Ten championship in year number one, yeah, that certainly puts a feather into the cap of this 2024 squad. But you might take one of the most talented Oregon teams in 2024, and now we look forward to 2025, and now we're asking the question, could this 2025 team be better than this 2024 team that was number one in the country for a lot of the second half of the season? Now, the first thing that I want to dive into as it pertains to maybe dissecting this topic and trying to formulate an answer to that question is the quarterback position. I think Dante Moore provides more, he provides more at quarterback than Dillon Gabriel. I think there was a safe approach maybe as it pertains to Dillon Gabriel. I don't think it's any secret that Dillon Gabriel's arm strength and ability to stretch the field with the deep ball really wasn't there. And I think Dillon Gabriel just did things to protect, and I think Will Stein calling this offense really did a lot to protect the football. I was recently listening to an episode of the Ducks Dish with the great Justin Hopkins and Max Torres that really illustrated this point, and I tend to agree certainly with this point as well. I don't know how much explosiveness, deep shots, playmaking opportunities down the field that there were with Dillon Gabriel. Now, I thought, being a Heisman finalist, it clearly did well. It clearly fit into his skill set, but Dante Moore has got a live arm and a half, folks. There's been a lot of people nationally, now that the season is over, they're starting to look forward to next season. And Dante Moore is starting to get a lot of attention, and rightfully so. I've said this before. I think Dante Moore has the highest ceiling of a Dan Lanning era quarterback. And yes, that includes Bo Nix. I think having somebody like Dante Moore gives Oregon another added dimension going down the field. They have an NFL type of arm. Now, I know Dillon Gabriel is certainly going to get his opportunity within the National Football League, but I think Dante Moore just maybe uncorks another part of what Oregon's offense certainly can be in 2025. Having Super Frosh, Decorian Moore is certainly going to be able to help that as well. There's going to be a ton of speed on the outside with sub 4.4 guys, Evan Stewart and Decorian Moore. So that combined with the live arm talent of Dante, I think is going to unleash something within Oregon's offense. And I'm not the only person. If you think I'm stupid, okay, I'm not the only person. There are other national people out there with larger followings than me that think this as well. But I think there is going to be something unleashed in Oregon's offense that we maybe haven't seen in the Dan Lanning era, certainly as well. Let's talk about the line change that is the secondary. I think that, and I'll maybe talk about this towards the end when I'm really finishing up my point as to whether I think the 2025 Ducks could be better than the 2024 Ducks. But secondary, you've got a complete line change. There's a lot of new personnel certainly in that room. But here's what I will say about the secondary. I think Dylan Thieneman transferring in from Purdue is as good of a player, let me correct myself, is as great of a player as Oregon has had in their secondary maybe in a very, very long time. Oregon continues to get better and have more size and more length and more athleticism in their secondary as the years continue to go by. So although it's a new secondary, will it be a better secondary? I'll say this. I know they brought in transfers Theron Johnson from Northwestern and the aforementioned Dylan Thieneman. But beyond that, it's going to be a little bit of a younger secondary. But one thing that Oregon has been able to do is they've been able to recruit as good as anybody when it comes to the secondary, when it comes to the defensive backs. I would watch out for Ife Obadedegwu, Theron Johnson, as I mentioned before, Peyton Woodyard as a couple of names to keep an eye on. These are high-level guys. These are high 4-star players. In some instances, these are 5-star type of players. Like they've got 2 5-stars coming in as true freshmen in Naeem Offord and Trey McNutt as well. This, I think, the secondary is going to be a big pivot point. They had experienced players in the secondary last year in Jabbar Muhammad, Kobe Savage, Brandon Johnson, some of these guys that transferred over. But I think these younger players, and you've heard some of the older players in this room say this, but I think these younger players have higher ceilings than some of those transfers that have brought over. Will we see the higher ceiling in 2025? That's certainly the $64,000 question. Another part to the defense, the defensive line. There are people in duck circles right now that are looking all over this roster, that are looking at all of these rooms within this defense and saying, this defensive line group, it might be the best room on the team. It might be the deepest room on the team. Now, how can you say an Oregon defensive line might be deeper and maybe even better when you lose Jordan Birch, when you lose Jamari Caldwell, when you lose Derek Harmon up front on the defensive line? There are 2 big pieces returning that I think could be all conference players, and I think that's a big part. And this is what elite programs do. They lose players to the National Football League, and what do? They replace them with the 4-star guys, with the 5-star guys, with the really good talent. That's what great programs do year after year after year, and that's what we're starting to see with Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks certainly right now. Of course, you got to start Mateo Uiagalelei, which I expect to take the position of where Jordan Birch was last season. He was 3rd in the Big Ten in sacks last year with 10.5, and I think he is on pace. And I think he will be one of maybe not only the Big Ten, but one of college football's best pass rushers next season. Amari Washington at defensive tackle is the guy. I mentioned Caldwell and I mentioned Harmon. He was that next guy in the defensive tackle rotation. He played all 14 games this season. There wasn't a huge defensive tackle rotation. I certainly think there will be a bigger, more bodies and more people within the defensive line rotation for the Ducks this season. I think Amari Washington has all of the skills to be an all Big Ten player, certainly right now. There's one room that I really like on this team, and it's linebacker. There's a player, like we saw Bryce Betcher take a big step forward last season. I think in the linebacker room, Devin Jackson, who pound for pound might have some of the most speed on this team, I think he's going to take a Bryce Betcher-sized jump this season. Circling back to the defensive line, I think Amari Washington could be that guy that could take a very sizable step forward on this defensive front for the Oregon Ducks. And then you look at somebody like a Blake Purchase, who's dealt with some injuries, but he's had some good production while at Oregon. Elijah Rushing and Aiden Breland are both 5-stars that are itching to get their opportunity on this Ducks defensive line, and man, they are great. Notice one name that I haven't even mentioned yet, and it's a former USC Trojan, Bear Alexander. I think with what Oregon has been able to recruit, what Oregon has been able to populate within this defensive line room with what I just talked about, I didn't even mention somebody like a Tatum Tuioti, who's kind of that jack outside linebacker that can certainly line up on the edge of the defensive line opposite of Mateo Uiagalelei. And having Tatum and Mateo on either side, you double team Mateo, Tatum's going to be able to get a favorable matchup, certainly coming off of the edge as well. But I didn't even mention Bear Alexander. I think with the depth within this room and with what I've already talked about, he is the definition, and he was the definition of this when he came into this program, but He is the definition of low risk and high reward. If Bear Alexander doesn't work out, and it's a lot like what we saw at USC, it's completely fine. But what if Tony Tuioti, the defensive line coach at Oregon, Tosh Lupoi, the defensive coordinator, what if this defensive coaching staff gets something out of Bear Alexander, gets him on the right track, maybe what Georgia and USC wasn't able to do? Now I think that's where this Oregon defensive line steps up into some of the better defensive lines in college football. When you have a Bear, an Amari, a Mateo on that first front, and then you can rotate in the Blake Purchases, the Aiden Brelands, the Elijah Rushings of the world. Now, depth on the defensive line. Ask Michigan how important depth on the defensive line is to being a championship-level football team. I love that defensive line group, certainly, for the Oregon Ducks. I think the interior offensive line is also going to take center stage. I think the interior offensive line has a pretty darn good chance to be better than the interior offensive line of last season. Big part of it is because of a USC transfer in Emmanuel Pranon, one of the best interior offensive linemen in this transfer portal cycle. You combine him with Iapani Lalaolu at center, also known as Pancho. I think he's going to step up and be, he already did last year, but I think he's going to take more steps forward as being one of the best centers in the Big Ten, if not all of college football. Whether it's Dave Iuli, whether it's Matthew Bedford at the other guard position, I think the interior of this offensive line is now going to be the strengths of this group. I know a lot of people have said a lot of good things about Isaiah World, who's transferring in from Nevada. Of course, Alex Harkey is another tackle transfer certainly out there, but with transfers coming from the group of five up to the Power 2 level, there's always a little bit certainly of uncertainty. I feel more certain about the interior of the offensive line that they're going to be able to move some people. And I think the run game is going to benefit. I mentioned how Dante Moore is going to be able to sling the ball a little bit more down the field. And there's been some people, like Tez Johnson said it at the Rose Bowl media availability, that said, hey, Dante Moore might be a Heisman finalist next season. I get that, and hey, I might agree with it. But here's my spicy take. You want to hear a hot take? I'm not a big hot take guy, but you want to hear a spicy take? Let me hit you with it. Yeah, everybody, you can throw out your Dante Moore, Heisman contender, and Heisman predictions. Okay, that's cool. I'll hit you with Mekhi Hughes. The running back coming in from Tulane that's had back-to-back over 1,300 yards at Tulane. Now that he's on a bigger stage, now that he's running behind a better offensive line, I think there's the potential for him to be one of the best running backs in all of college football next season. There's a chance you might see Mekhi Hughes on the stage in New York. Maybe you'll see both Mekhi Hughes and Dante Moore on the stage in New York City. But I think that this is going to be an ultra-balanced offense for the Oregon Ducks, certainly next season. All right, let's start to answer the question. The Ducks 2025 versus the Ducks 2024. And I'm going to kind of continue with where I just left off. I think that this is going to be one of the more balanced offenses in college football, and I certainly think that's going to help out a first-year starter in Dante Moore to be able to lean on a really good run game with Mekhi Hughes and Noah Whittington certainly in there as well. But because of the arm talent, of the ability of Dante Moore and the speed that they have, and I didn't even mention who I think will be one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten in Kenyon Sadiq, I think this offense will be a better, more explosive, higher productive offense in 2025 than it was in 2024. Okay? So we've established that. Second part, defense. I think defense is a big pivot point. I talked about linebackers. I really like their linebacker room starting off. We'll see what happens with depth, but Betcher and Tuioti and Devin Jackson, I feel really good about those pieces. I talked about the defensive line, how I think that can be a deep group. I think the secondary is going to be a huge pivot point as to whether this defense is going to be better. And for Oregon, continue to raise and climb up the ladder The secondary and the defense overall needs to be better, especially against the better teams in the conference in college football. The defense gave up over 1,000 yards, 1,030 to be exact, in the last 2 games of the season, Big Ten championship game against Penn State, and of course the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. A lot of that dials into the secondary. Is this talent going to be able to step up and be better in the secondary? If it is, I think overall this Oregon team could be better in 2025 than it was in 2024. And folks, that is certainly saying something. Always good to talk some West Coast football. Leave all your thoughts in the comments below of all things Trojans and Ducks. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.